The day started like any other. Sunlight crept through the blinds of our suburban home, painting the room in soft gold. I was already awake, staring at the ceiling, a strange heaviness sitting in my chest. Sarah stirred beside me, oblivious to my unease, her face serene in sleep. For a fleeting moment, I considered waking her up with a kiss like I used to in the early days of our marriage. But something held me back, a growing distance between us, unspoken and undeniable. The routine continued as usual. Breakfast was a flurry of clinking mugs, the whir of the coffee machine, and the chatter of our two kids. Emma, our oldest at 13, was arguing with her brother, Jake, over the TV remote. Sarah moved through the kitchen with practiced ease, her smile bright but her eyes distant. She kissed each child on the forehead before grabbing her purse and heading for the door. Her lips brushed my cheek in a mechanical gesture. "Have a good day, honey," she said, her tone almost too casual. "You too," I replied, watching as she left. The door clicked shut, and the sound lingered longer than it should have. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't one thing but an accumulation of subtle changes, her late nights, her guarded phone, the excuses that felt rehearsed. My gut told me to investigate, but I dismissed it. After all, she was my wife. We'd been together for 15 years. If you couldn't trust the person you married, who could you trust? Work that day was a blur. My focus drifted constantly, and I caught myself staring at the clock more than my computer screen. I couldn't tell you what tasks I completed or what emails I sent. All I knew was that something gnawed at me, a shadow in the corner of my mind that refused to be ignored. That evening, Sarah arrived home later than usual. She breezed in with a plastic smile and an apology about a last-minute meeting. The smell of takeout filled the air as she placed a bag on the counter. Jake cheered, excited for burgers, but I couldn't muster the same enthusiasm. "Everything okay?" I asked as she pulled plates from the cabinet. She paused, just for a second, before flashing me a quick smile. "Of course. Why wouldn't it be?" Her answer was too smooth, too polished. But I let it go, unwilling to start an argument in front of the kids. Dinner was uneventful, filled with chatter about school and Jake's latest obsession with video games. Sarah seemed engaged, laughing at Emma's sarcastic remarks, but I saw the way her phone stayed face down on the table, her eyes flickering to it every few minutes. That night, as we climbed into bed, I decided to press the issue. "You've been working late a lot," I said, keeping my tone neutral. She shrugged, her back to me as she adjusted her pillow. "Big projects, you know how it is." I didn't, not really. Her marketing job was demanding, but never to this extent. "Maybe you should take a break. We could use a weekend away." Her body stiffened, just for a moment, before she turned to face me with a soft smile. "That sounds nice. Let me check my schedule." It was a non-answer, and we both knew it. I didn't push further, but as she drifted off to sleep, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling again. The distance between us was no longer subtle, it was a chasm, and I wasn't sure how to bridge it. The next morning brought the moment that changed everything. Sarah was in the shower, her phone buzzing on the nightstand. I wouldn't have looked at it if it hadn't been for the message preview that popped up. It was from someone named Liam. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again, gorgeous." My heart stopped. The words burned into my mind, each one a dagger. I stared at the screen, willing the message to vanish, to be a mistake. But it was there, undeniable and taunting. When she emerged from the bathroom, towel wrapped around her, the steam trailing behind her like a guilty shadow, I was still sitting there. Her eyes landed on her phone, and I saw the brief flicker of panic before she masked it with a smile. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice too casual. "Who's Liam?" The question was out before I could stop myself. Her smile faltered, and for a split second, I saw the truth in her eyes. She stammered something about a work colleague, but the damage was done. The carefully constructed facade of our marriage began to crack. The rest of that morning was a blur of half-truths and evasions. She denied everything at first, then trickled out pieces of a story that didn't quite add up. By the time she left for work, I was left with more questions than answers and a sinking feeling that my world was about to collapse. I spent the day consumed by doubt and anger, replaying every interaction, every moment that now seemed like a lie. How long had this been going on? How could I have missed the signs? By the time Sarah came home, I had made a decision. I needed the truth, all of it. That night, as she slept, I sat in the living room, scrolling through her social media, her emails, anything I could find. My heart pounded as I unearthed small but damning pieces of evidence, photos from trips she never mentioned, late-night messages, and receipts that didn't match her stories. Each discovery was a nail in the coffin of my trust. When morning came, I was no closer to confronting her, but the weight of what I had learned hung heavy in the air. As she kissed me goodbye, I couldn't help but wonder if she could feel the shift, the storm brewing just beneath the surface. The game had changed, and I was no longer content to be a passive player. It was time to take control. Sarah's demeanor had changed, but not in a way that she seemed to notice. She carried on with the same air of casual nonchalance, a mask of normalcy that would have fooled anyone else. But not me, not anymore. Every movement, every glance at her phone, every excuse felt like a thread I could unravel. I knew the truth now, or at least the shape of it. What I lacked were the details, and those details consumed my thoughts. By the time the kids were off to school and Sarah had left for work, I was pacing the living room like a man preparing for battle. The confrontation that morning had barely scratched the surface. Liam. Just the name was enough to make my chest tighten. I needed answers, but more importantly, I needed proof. Something undeniable. Her phone had been locked that morning after I confronted her, a new code hastily added. But there were other ways. I pulled out my laptop, the cursor hovering over the search bar. It didn't take long to find a monitoring app that would quietly mirror her phone's activity to mine. It was invasive, unethical even, but so was infidelity. As I clicked the install button, I told myself this wasn't about revenge, it was about clarity. That night, I waited until Sarah was asleep, her phone charging on the nightstand. With practiced ease, I connected it to my laptop, installing the software while my heart pounded like a drum. If she woke up, I wasn't sure what I'd say. But she didn't stir, and within minutes, it was done. Her secrets were no longer hers alone. The next day, I began to see the shape of her double life. Texts to Liam filled with inside jokes, emojis, and plans that made my stomach churn. They weren't just casual acquaintances, they were lovers. And it wasn't new. Their messages hinted at months, maybe longer. I read each one, the words searing themselves into my mind. Last night was incredible. I can't wait to hold you again. You're the only thing keeping me sane in this crazy life. Are you still good for Friday? I'll book the room. Friday. That was tomorrow. The texts painted a vivid picture. Sarah had no late meeting or client dinner. She had plans with Liam, plans that included a hotel room. My hands trembled as I scrolled, my fury growing with each word. But beneath the anger was a gnawing sense of inadequacy, a voice whispering that maybe I had failed her somehow. That voice didn't last long. I wasn't the one sneaking off, lying, betraying vows that were supposed to mean something. No, this wasn't my failure, it was hers. And she was about to face the consequences. The day dragged on, my mind racing with possibilities. Confronting her outright seemed too simple, too satisfying. If she could lie so effortlessly, what was to stop her from spinning another story? No, I needed to think bigger. She had taken so much from me, trust, love, stability. I would take something from her in return. When she came home that evening, she was all smiles. Her laughter filled the kitchen as she helped Emma with homework, her jokes earning groans from Jake. I watched from the doorway, my face carefully neutral. She was good at this, I realized. Too good. If I hadn't found that message, I might have believed the act. "Everything okay?" she asked, catching my gaze. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Just tired." She nodded, her attention shifting back to Emma's algebra problem. I felt a strange mix of admiration and revulsion. How could she sit here, acting like the perfect wife and mother, knowing what she was planning for tomorrow? That night, I pretended to fall asleep beside her, my breathing slow and even. When I was certain she was asleep, I slipped out of bed and retrieved my laptop. Her texts had confirmed their rendezvous, but I wanted more. I wanted to see them together. I placed a call to a private investigator I had researched earlier that day. The man on the other end had a gruff voice, the kind that sounded like it had seen too much of life's underbelly. "I need someone followed," I said, my voice low. "Tomorrow night." "Name and details?" he asked, businesslike. I gave him everything I knew, her name, his name, the location mentioned in their texts. He promised to get me photos, videos, anything that could corroborate my suspicions. When I hung up, the reality of what I was doing hit me like a freight train. I was planning an ambush on my own marriage. But this wasn't just about catching her. It was about regaining control of a life that felt like it was slipping through my fingers. The next day was a masterclass in pretending. Sarah left in the morning, claiming she had back-to-back meetings and wouldn't be home until late. I nodded, kissed her on the cheek, and wished her a good day. Inside, I seethed. As evening approached, I parked a block away from the hotel where they planned to meet. The private investigator had sent me updates. Sarah had arrived first, dressed in a way I hadn't seen her dress for me in years. Liam followed shortly after, his hand on the small of her back as they entered the building together. The sight was like a punch to the gut. I stayed in the car, my hands gripping the wheel until my knuckles turned white. The investigator promised to get everything I needed, but part of me wanted to storm in, to confront them then and there. I resisted the urge, reminding myself that this was bigger than a single moment. An hour passed. Then two. My phone buzzed, a message from the investigator. He had the footage, clear and damning. They were in the room together, their intimacy captured in a way that left no room for doubt. I drove home, the weight of what I had seen settling over me like a shroud. By the time Sarah returned, her hair slightly mussed and her smile too bright, I had made my decision. The evidence was enough. Tomorrow, everything would change. She kissed me goodnight, oblivious to the storm she had unleashed. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt a strange sense of calm. The facade was over. It was time for her to see the consequences of her choices. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting fractured patterns across the bedroom walls. Sarah lay next to me, her face peaceful, almost angelic in sleep. It would have been endearing if I didn't know the truth. The memories of last night's revelations were like daggers twisting in my chest, but there was no turning back now. Today would be the reckoning. I slipped out of bed quietly, my movements deliberate. In the kitchen, I made coffee, the mundane act grounding me in the storm of emotions brewing beneath the surface. I had barely taken a sip when my phone buzzed. It was a message from the private investigator, confirming that all evidence had been delivered to my email. Photos, videos, timestamps, it was all there. I opened my laptop at the kitchen counter, my heart pounding as I clicked through the files. The images were sharp, crystal clear. Sarah and Liam, walking into the hotel, laughing, touching, kissing. It was all there, undeniable proof of her betrayal. My stomach churned, but my resolve hardened. I had everything I needed to confront her. Sarah wandered into the kitchen not long after, dressed in a loose sweater and leggings, her hair pulled into a lazy ponytail. She smiled, kissed my cheek, and poured herself a cup of coffee. "Morning," she said cheerfully, as though she hadn't spent the night in another man's arms. "Morning," I replied, my voice steady, giving nothing away. She sat at the table across from me, scrolling through her phone. Her casual demeanor was a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. I wanted to grab her phone, throw it across the room, demand answers. But I held back. Timing was everything. "Any plans today?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "Just the usual," she replied. "Groceries, errands. What about you?" "I've got a few things to take care of," I said, my words carefully chosen. "But we should talk later. There's something on my mind." Her eyes flickered up briefly, a hint of nervousness flashing across her face before she masked it with a smile. "Sure. Later." She left the house shortly after, humming to herself as though nothing was amiss. I watched her drive away, a mix of anger and sadness knotting in my chest. This was the woman I had loved, the mother of my children, and yet here we were, living parallel lives full of secrets. I spent the next few hours preparing. The evidence was printed, organized, and placed in a folder. I drafted an email to our lawyer, explaining the situation and attaching the necessary documentation. I wanted everything in place before I confronted her. This wasn't going to be an impulsive argument, it was going to be the beginning of the end. Sarah returned in the late afternoon, carrying bags of groceries. I helped her unload them in silence, the tension between us palpable. She noticed it, of course, but didn't say anything. Maybe she thought I was just in a mood. Maybe she thought she could charm her way past it like she always did. When the kids were settled in their rooms and the house had quieted, I called her into the living room. She hesitated for a moment, then followed, her expression curious but cautious. I motioned for her to sit on the couch. I remained standing, the folder in my hands. "What's going on, Mark?" she asked, her voice laced with uncertainty. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I need you to be honest with me, Sarah. About everything." Her brow furrowed, confusion, or maybe feigned confusion, clouding her face. "What do you mean?" "Liam," I said simply, the name hanging in the air like a thunderclap. Her face went pale. For a moment, she looked like a cornered animal, her eyes darting around the room as though searching for an escape. Then she straightened, forcing a weak smile. "Mark, I don't know what you're talking about." I dropped the folder onto the coffee table with a thud, the pictures spilling out like a dam breaking. Her eyes widened as she saw them, images of her and Liam, laughing, kissing, walking into the hotel. All her lies laid bare in glossy, undeniable clarity. "Don't lie to me," I said, my voice low but firm. "I've seen everything. I know everything." For a moment, she said nothing, her face a mix of shock and guilt. Then the tears started, rolling down her cheeks as she buried her face in her hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Sorry?" I repeated, my anger bubbling to the surface. "You're sorry? For what? For lying? For cheating? For destroying our family?" She looked up, her eyes red and puffy. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I didn't mean to hurt you." "Then why did you do it?" I demanded. "Why, Sarah? Was I not enough for you? Were our kids not enough?" "It wasn't about you," she said, her voice trembling. I felt lost. Trapped. Liam made me feel alive again. Her words were like knives. "So you threw away everything we built for a fling?" "It wasn't just a fling," she admitted, her voice cracking. I thought I loved him." I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and cold. "Love? That's what you call sneaking around and lying to my face? Love?" She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Mark, please. Let's work through this. We can fix it. There's no fixing this, Sarah, I said, my voice hard. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. I handed her a manila envelope, the divorce papers I had prepared earlier. Her hands trembled as she opened it, her face crumpling as she realized what it was. Mark, no, she pleaded, her voice breaking. Please, don't do this. Think about the kids. Think about us. I am thinking about the kids, I said. And they deserve better than this. Better than lies and betrayal. She sobbed, clutching the papers to her chest. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt, but I pushed it aside. This wasn't about punishing her, it was about reclaiming my life, my dignity. I'll give you some time to figure out your next steps, I said, my voice cold. But this? This is over. I turned and walked away, leaving her sobbing on the couch. As I closed the door behind me, I felt a strange sense of relief. The storm wasn't over, but I had taken the first step toward clearing the wreckage. For weeks after that night, Sarah moved through the house like a ghost, her face a constant mask of regret. The kids noticed, of course, though we both tried to shield them from the cracks that had turned into gaping chasms in our marriage. I had made it clear, this wasn't fixable. Yet every day, she tried. Apologies whispered in passing, attempts at conversation, offers to cook my favorite meals. None of it moved me. I'd filed the divorce papers, and the process was moving along faster than I had anticipated. My lawyer was a bulldog, ensuring everything was airtight. The house would go to me, custody of the kids was firmly in my favor, and Sarah would leave with what she came into the marriage with, a pittance compared to what we'd built together. It was harsh but fair, or so I told myself. And yet, as the days dragged on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. Sarah was too compliant, too resigned. It was as if she had accepted the end of our marriage with barely a fight. I expected more anger, more defiance. Instead, she seemed almost serene. That sense of calm unnerved me more than her betrayal ever could. One afternoon, as I was cleaning out the garage, I found a box of old photo albums. Flipping through the pages, I saw the life we'd built together, the smiles, the vacations, the memories. A younger version of us stared back, full of hope and love. I closed the album abruptly, the weight of nostalgia too much to bear. It was then that I heard the doorbell. Wiping my hands on my jeans, I made my way to the front door. Standing there was Liam. My stomach churned as I took him in, tall, smug, and entirely too comfortable standing on my porch. Before I could speak, he extended a hand, as though we were old friends meeting for drinks. "Mark, right?" he said, his voice smooth and infuriatingly self-assured. "What the hell are you doing here?" I demanded, ignoring his hand. He smirked, lowering his arm. "I thought it was time we talked. Man to man." I stepped outside, closing the door behind me to keep the kids from overhearing. "You've got 5 seconds before I throw you off this porch." Liam raised his hands in mock surrender. "Easy. I just thought you'd like to know the truth." "The truth?" I scoffed. "I know the truth. You slept with my wife. End of story." "Not quite," he said, his smirk deepening. "You think I pursued Sarah? That I seduced her?" "No, Mark. It was the other way around." I froze, his words slicing through my composure. "What are you talking about?" He leaned against the porch railing, completely at ease. "Sarah approached me. She said she was unhappy, that you were distant, emotionally unavailable. She practically begged me to be with her. I tried to resist, believe it or not, but she was persistent." "Why are you telling me this now?" I growled, fists clenched at my sides. "Because she's not who you think she is," he said, his voice dropping into something almost conspiratorial. "She doesn't want you, Mark. She doesn't want me either. She wants freedom. And she's willing to do whatever it takes to get it. Before I could respond, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, fists trembling with a mix of rage and confusion. His words echoed in my head long after he disappeared from sight. That night, I confronted Sarah. She was sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through a magazine, her demeanor calm as ever. "Did you love him?" I asked bluntly, my voice cold. She looked up, startled, but didn't answer right away. Finally, she sighed. "No, Mark. I didn't love him. I don't even think I liked him." "Then why?" I demanded, slamming my hand on the table. "Why throw away everything we built for nothing?" Her eyes filled with tears, but there was a steely edge to her voice as she replied. "Because I couldn't do this anymore. The pretending, the perfect wife routine. I was suffocating, Mark. And I didn't know how else to escape." I staggered back, her words hitting me like a freight train. "So this was all some kind of exit strategy?" She nodded, a single tear slipping down her cheek. "I knew if I pushed you far enough, you'd end it for me. And you did." The room spun as her confession sunk in. The betrayal, the lies, the affair, it wasn't about me. It was about her. Her freedom, her autonomy, her need to escape a life she no longer wanted. "You could have just told me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Would you have listened?" she countered, her tone sharp. "Would you have let me go without a fight?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. We both knew the truth. The next morning, Sarah was gone. She left a note on the kitchen counter, simple and direct. "Mark. I'm sorry for everything. Take care of the kids. I'll be in touch." No forwarding address, no explanation, just a clean break. For the first time in weeks, I felt something unexpected, relief. In the end, it wasn't the affair that destroyed us. It was the realization that we were both prisoners of a life we no longer wanted. And maybe, in some strange, painful way, Sarah had done us both a favor.